Welcome to this webinar presentation, How to Create the Influencer Brief. My name is Jon Davids here at Influicity. Thanks for joining us today. This is a really important topic because if you don't get the influencer brief right, you probably won't get the rest of the influencer campaign right, or at least there's a less of a chance of doing so. How do you talk to influencers? How do you present the concept? How do you sell your brand? And how do you do it in a way that's kind of fun, digestible, won't take a whole lot of time? We'll get into that in just a second. If you're a regular viewer of our content, thanks for joining us again. If you're new here, Influicity works with brands and agencies across all aspects of influencer marketing, from social media to podcasts to paid media and beyond. Our content and our research is totally free. All we ask is that if you find content like this valuable, go ahead and share it with a colleague or post it on social media. We really appreciate it. Keeps the wins in our sails and lets us keep doing what we're doing. Okay, how to create the influencer brief. Let's do it.
Welcome to this webinar presentation brought to you by Influicity, trusted by world-class brands for influencer media, original podcasts, and marketing across emerging platforms. Here is your host, Influicity CEO Jon Davids.
Okay, let's get into it. So for this webinar, we're going to be looking at a fictional brand called Glow Pop, a cosmetic brand based in Austin, Texas. Their new line of matte lipsticks, Pure Pop, is set for launch in spring 2022. And we're going to use this brand to go through the process of creating a fictional brief. We'll talk about what to include, do's and don'ts, and I'll share some insights along the way. If you have questions, by the way, I'll try to get to all of them at the end of the webinar. Feel free to just put them into the Zoom Q&A area. So the first section we're going to be looking at is the campaign overview. And there's a few elements we always want to include in the campaign overview. Start off with a headline. I always like to use a headline, try to keep it around 7 words. You can go longer, 10, 15 words, but as long as it's catchy, depending on your title and verbiage. Include the objective of the campaign. What is it that you want the influencer or the brand to achieve? And finally, what does success look like? Really, really important to tell the influencer what will make the campaign successful in terms of what they have control over. So how does that look on the brief itself? Well, here's the campaign overview. Tell your fans about our new matte lipstick, Pure Pop. Glow Pop wants to generate awareness for its newest product, Pure Pop, by teaming up with 10 influencers, each posting 4 pieces of content over 6 weeks across Instagram and TikTok. We're targeting 100,000 impressions per post for a total of 2 million organic impressions. So a couple of things I'll point out here. Notice that the headline at the top, tell your fans about our new matte lipstick. We're very clearly telling them exactly what this is. We got the product, we got what makes it original, got the brand name. I mentioned down below 10 influencers, each posting 4 pieces of content. Now this can be changed a little bit. Sometimes we'll do it like this. Sometimes we won't disclose the size or the number of influencers taking part. We'll phrase that as by teaming up with you to post 4 pieces of content over 6 weeks. The reason we will sometimes put the number of influencers in, if there's a lot of influencers, and 10's not a lot, you might have 20, 30, 40 influencers, but you can sort of encourage people to respond and encourage them to take part if they know they're part of a larger group. And that's sometimes why we'll say, 10 influencers are going to be doing this. Now, it could backfire if the influencers you're talking to are all very big stars, in which case maybe they don't want to be in a pilot, in a group of 10. But sometimes it can help. So just keep that one little variation in mind. But this campaign overview is really succinct, gets to the point, and tells them what it's all about. Okay, next, a really, really cool tactic is to include visuals. And not enough brands do this. We see brand RFPs all the time. We're constantly seeing influencer briefs in market. And the nice thing about visuals is the photo says 1,000 words. So you can see the product, you can see what a visual would look like, what a picture, what a video would look like. And this is a very subtle way of explaining to the influencer what you expect without telling them exactly what to do. I'm going to get in a few minutes to how to get the best creatively out of the influencer. But this is a really cool tactic up front. How do you get these photos? We have model shots. We do it all the time on behalf of our clients. We'll constantly create visuals that are just samples to show to influencers to onboard them. If you have other influencers that have created content, or you have content that you've created yourself that fits the aesthetic you're going for, feel free to include it. Okay, the next piece of this is the campaign timeline. And we do like to include this pretty much right at the top, as the second, maybe the third item. So what to include in the campaign timeline? First thing, a kickoff call. Kickoff call with the brand, with the agency, with the key stakeholders, with the influencers, whoever needs to be on that call, make sure you schedule that. Offer acceptance deadline. And the kickoff call could be before or after, depending on, again, the scale of your campaign. If you need to have a kickoff call to explain the campaign before people are going to be willing to sign on, or if you want to flip those two, that's fine as well. Campaign end date. What is the time commitment here? How long do you expect influencers to remain engaged in this program? First content draft, followed by second content draft, and finally content launches. And now there's a reason we include first content draft, second content draft. Sometimes we get questioned about that. Well, what if the first piece of content they give us is perfect? I say, great, then they're ahead of schedule. But it would probably be better off including and scheduling in a second content draft, and maybe even a third content draft. This is going to help you in two ways. A, you're scheduling in the fact that you're going to need to go back and forth. Maybe it's not going to be a home run on the first try. It also helps with influencer negotiations. It helps with setting expectations. You're basically saying your very first draft post is going to be rejected. We're not going to accept it, and then the second one will probably accept it, or maybe the third one will accept. If you don't include that, if you just say content should be submitted by X date and then it goes live, the next step is go live. All of a sudden, when you reject the content, it's like, wait a second, this is it's going to throw my schedule off. So plan for a second content draft in your work back schedule. Okay, what does that look like in the influencer brief? Campaign timeline, March 5th to May 10th, and we've got all those key dates laid out. Couple observations I'll make here. Make sure there's a reasonable amount of time between each item and be considerate. Sometimes we see brands who, they say, oh, we're going to send the product to the influencer on the Monday and we want the finished content by the Tuesday afternoon. Well, no, these influencers, they do take a long time. They put effort, especially if it's video content, if it's food content, they might have to create the recipe and prep the items. As well, they might have day jobs. This might be their side hustle, or if this is their full-time job, they have other clients. So leave an appropriate amount of time. As I mentioned before, build in draft approvals. And of course, for yourselves, you as the agency or the brand manager probably know this, but I always like to say, especially, we work with clients who are in the banking sector or heavily regulated sectors. Leave an appropriate amount of time for feedback, because you don't want to leave influencers hanging. If you know that internal approvals on your end take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, don't tell the influencer that you're going to get back to them in 3 days, because then it just kind of throws the whole thing off and it makes the brand look like they're not prepared. So if the brand tells me, oh, it's going to take a week to get internal approvals, I might say, let's put 2 weeks in there. Let's get ahead of a potential issue. Okay, let's now talk about content requirements. The first piece here is the type of content and platform. Remember, lots of influencers have lots of different platforms and channels, TikTok, Instagram, and then within each channel, you'll have different form factors as well, the biggest one being Instagram. There's maybe five form factors on Instagram: Reels, Stories, feed, in-feed, IGTV, and then there's meta content within even those channels. So be very specific on what channel you're looking for, or multiple channels. YouTube, Instagram, etc. Number of content pieces, and I will go even more specific here. If you're talking about something like a TikTok or an Instagram story, you might even want to get down to frames or seconds. If, for example, on Instagram story, it's not uncommon to say a 3-frame Instagram story. You want to be specific, and that will help to ensure that there's no surprises. High-level creative concept. And what I like to say here is provide direction, not instruction. So you will always make an influencer feel better if you provide them direction, but don't tell them how to do their job. There's a few ways to ensure that they're going to do what you want them to do without being so blunt. So one way is what I mentioned earlier, share visuals at the very beginning. Visuals do a great job. Share a variety so they can see that there's not one right way to do it. Provide general direction. But don't say step-by-step instruction, here's what I want you to do. Now, what you do want to make sure is that important notes are included. So is travel required? Is there additional production? The other kind of notes would be things like specific call to action or things that you must say. One example, I've used it 100 times, so apologies if you've heard this before, but we have a big hair care brand that we work with, and we can say salon-like results, but we can't say salon results if you use this hair coloring product. So if there are super specific things like that, make sure you make it clear so you don't have unnecessary back and forth, specific requirements within your brand, what you can say, language, etc. So let's go back to the influencer brief and see what this might look like. Content requirements. You will be sent a care package with Pure Pop lipsticks. Use it to create a glam makeup look to share across Instagram and TikTok. Create 4 pieces of video content, 10 to 15 seconds, highlighting Pure Pop lipsticks. 1 TikTok video, 3 Instagram story frames. Again, this can be whatever version you want it to be, but that's essentially what you'll put. Well, I'll just pause here for a second and take note of the fact that we're now 3 sections into the content. We've got 3 sections into the brief. We've got the campaign overview, the campaign timeline, and the content requirements. And we're still at the top half of the page. So we're trying to go for brevity here, and we don't want to overload them. I've seen briefs where brands want to put their entire brand Bible up front. It just doesn't do much for the influencer. Although it makes the brand feel better, the influencer doesn't necessarily need that to do their job. One other thing I'll mention, I forgot to mention it with campaign timeline. There are better visual ways to do this. We have a signature look that we use at Influicity to lay out the the campaign timeline in a really aesthetically pleasing way, pack a lot of information in one page. So there are more creative ways to do that. I'm happy to send you a template if you're interested, but you could do it just on a page like this as well. Let's get into key messaging. So thought starters for influencers to help them create content. Thought starters are a good idea. I mentioned earlier, it's about direction, not instruction. So thought starters are a great launching point because it helps the influencer start to think in a way and in a direction that you want them to go in without, giving them too many rails that they can't go beyond. So what does that look like in a brief? Key messaging. Creativity, be creative and have fun. We want to see how you would use different shades of Pure Pop in your everyday routines for a glamorous look. Don't worry about trying to sell the product. Instead, we hope that you produce content that you feel your followers will love, comment on, and share. And then, of course, we have special notes. Talk about us, no competitive products, and use your own voice. Those are just special mentions. You can be as detailed or as brief as you want here, but this is the place to include maybe a little more detail. If you want to get into even more detail, like you want to actually include a sort of a longer form version, you might consider doing something like an appendix or check out this back page for more information. Influencers might reference that, but you're not going to force them or interrupt the brief to provide a whole bunch of deep dive information. You can put that towards the back of the brief. Okay. Required tags, links, titles, and disclaimers. So you'll want to include things like campaign hashtags, brand hashtags, User handles, if you want to tag other people, other influencers, that's a great tactic. Tag other influencers so they can start sharing each other's posts. Landing pages and different calls to action. Mandatory copy, this is what I was saying earlier. Salon-like results versus salon results. And make sure you have mandatory copy, exact verbiage as you need it to be used. YouTube title, Instagram captions, and anything like that. And then industry-specific disclosure. Super important if you're in gaming or cannabis or crypto or fintech or any of those categories, and I'm sure many others. Make sure you've got disclosures there that are required for your industry. So some of the required tags could be hashtag ad, of course, hashtag PurePop, hashtag GlowPop, tag @GlowPop, or whoever else you want to tag in there. Okay, content approvals and other requirements. What does winning content look like? Ensure that you lay that out in the front, and we're sort of touching on that throughout the whole brief, but just make sure there's no ambiguity there. We expect to get ABC from you, and maybe within that, it can look different ways or sound different ways, but this is what winning content would look like. Content deal breakers, this is an important one, maybe even more important in some ways. You're telling them what's off limits, where not to go. So an example of this might be if we have a beverage product, we want to demonstrate our product, or we want to showcase our product in a family setting. We don't want to showcase the product in a park. I'm thinking of an alcohol brand right now. So, we want to show you consuming this product or enjoying this product in your home. Don't take a shot of this alcohol brand in your car, obviously. So any deal breakers, whether it's a brand deal breaker, a regulatory deal breaker, make clear what it is that you cannot do. Approval timelines. So we sort of have that in the work back section. And then be as specific as you can here. You want to make sure that you avoid unpleasant conversations, and I'll get to that on my next slide. And the way to do that is to always have a reference point and say, we did talk about this, we mentioned it in the brief. Again, if you don't want to put it in the body of your main brief, put it in a back section. At least you have, a couple other pages behind the brief, appendixes, where you can say, we did reference this, and this is an important point to follow. Okay, avoiding unpleasant conversations. So here are a couple rules of thumb that we here at Influicity have used for a long time. Sometimes it's made us, clients don't always love it, but we do stick to this because it helps us maintain a certain reputation in the industry. We try never to make an offer and withdraw it. So in an influencer brief, or I guess this is even moving in front of that, in an influencer offer situation, it's really bad practice to make an offer and then withdraw it. So there's a few ways to avoid that. You put a timeline on the offer. You say, here's the offer. This is what you need. This is what we need you to do. And please respond to me by X date. Give them 2, 3, 4 days. If they don't respond to you by X date, you can send them another note and say, the offer is now expired. We've had to move on with other influencers. You can send them maybe a reminder even before it expires. The other thing you can do is just ensure that if you didn't do that, if you have an offer out there that doesn't have an expiry, you can send a follow-up note and say, if I don't hear back from you tomorrow, or if I don't get a positive response, then I'll assume it's a no. What you want to avoid is just having a situation where you make an offer to an influencer, they get back to you 4 days later and you say, oh, actually, we moved on. Or you send an offer out and then they agree and you say, you know what, actually, after further consideration, we're going to say no. That happens in extreme situations, of course, but it's just bad practice. I will tell you, if I'm not sure on the call who's dealt with influencers at different levels, but if you're dealing with tier 1 Hollywood agencies, there's sort of an unwritten rule, and sometimes it is a written rule. You don't make an offer unless it's written in stone, because otherwise you just have you have a bad reputation in the market. Don't move the goalposts once the campaign has launched. Again, if you have that influencer brief, if you figured out what to do, and then the content is under development, everyone's on their way, everyone's moving forward according to the brief, and then you figure out we're going to change it. We're going to make different types of content and different timelines and this and that. Again, some of this is unavoidable. People understand that, but it doesn't look good when you do it arbitrarily. Always be upfront about everything. That's sort of my ethos across the board. I think fewer surprises makes everyone happy. And be sensitive with date changes. You might need to sometimes change dates, move them up, push them back. That does happen, but just be sensitive. As I was alluding to earlier, if you have a situation where you need content created, allow 2, 3, 4 days, depending on the type of content, for that to be done. Don't email someone, on a Wednesday evening and say, I need this first thing tomorrow morning. Again, unless there's some complete emergency that warrants that. I wouldn't bake it into your plan though. Okay, things you should never tell an influencer. Some of these might seem a little bit funny, but we've experienced all of them. And so that's why we speak from experience. Your content sucks. We've seen that. We've had clients on threads with influencers, email threads, and the client's very blunt, very forward, and maybe doesn't have experience working with an influencer. We've even had folks on our team, folks that work on our sales team. We have a rule. If you're in sales, you don't talk to influencers. Our client service and our influencer relations team talks to influencers. You've got to be sensitive. It's not because they're overly sensitive people, but they're putting a lot of work into this, and you want to be constructive and not critical with influencer feedback. Can you do 5 more posts? That's something we've seen also. Brands don't necessarily realize not only the contractual obligations, but the time obligations, the competitive obligations, the other editorial that has to go out. So doing additional posts, doing anything that is a substantial change without a warrant to do so, without any reason to do so, it's just something you should avoid. Okay, so to recap the different sections here, we've got the campaign overview, we've got the campaign timeline. Again, on the timeline piece of it, you can make that its own section and break it out and make it more aesthetically pleasing and more robust. And there's different ways to do it. Content requirements, key messaging, which is where you're going to probably have a little more bulk because you're going to be more specific there. Required tags. And then, of course, we've gone over things that you shouldn't do. And that's the influencer brief.